It's become a tradition in Yisodei Torah that every year during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva we have a Sicha from Rav Herczeg. Rav Herczeg, of course, teaches our top shir, and he's written many important svarim. He's also someone who inspires us on a daily basis by his presence. The interactions with him are always one always gets the sense when he's interacting with someone who has been devoted and steeped only in Torah for many years, and has sat at the feet of great Gedolim and brings all of that with him. So while this is an opportunity for us as a yeshiva to hear words of inspiration for Yom Kippur from Rav Herczeg, we also take this opportunity to appreciate what we have in having such a frontline Talmud Chacham and Torah personality in our Beis Medrash every day.
Thank you, Rabbi Wilkie. David HaMelech tells us in Sefer Tehillim, Shivisi Hashem l'nevi tamid. I set Hashem in front of me constantly. David HaMelech is saying that he is constantly conscious of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's setting an ideal for us. But is that ideal attainable for us? How many of us constantly are thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are constantly aware of his presence? We certainly believe he's always there and always in control, but how much of the day is that at the forefront of our consciousness? Is it possible to be constantly aware of Hashem? And if it's impossible, what's David HaMelech telling us that for? Must we be constantly aware of Hashem? Are we, I even hate to say the word, but I'll ask the question, are we allowed to forget him sometimes? Chas v'sholom. Then we stand a chance? Let me make the question even sharper. There's a brisa in Maseches Tamid, Daf Lamed Beis, Ezehu Chacham Haroeh Es Hanolod. Who, I'll translate it, simple pshat. Who is the wise man? He who sees consequences. That's simple pshat. People do things and they don't think, they don't realize what's going to result from the things they do, and they get into all kinds of trouble. A wise man thinks before he acts, works out the consequences. That's simple pshat. But there's another pshat in that statement of Chazal, and this is found in the Sefer Vikucha Rabbah. Vikucha Rabbah is Aramaic for the great polemic, the great argument. It's a very interesting Sefer, written in the 1840s. We don't know the name of the author. It was published anonymously. It's a response to the Nefesh HaChaim of Rav Chaim Volozhiner, which on one level is an attack on Hasidus. So this Sefer is a defense of Hasidus, specifically the charges that the Nefesh HaChaim levels against Hasidus. So in the course of that Sefer, it's not all, argumentation. There's a lot of nice Divrei Torah there. So the author tells us his pshat in Ezehu Chacham Haroeh Es Hanolod. To translate that phrase again, too literally, it is, who is a wise man? He who sees that which is being born, that which is being generated. The Vikucha Rabbah says that this brisa is telling us what is true wisdom. True wisdom is realizing that any circumstance we are found in the material world at any time, I should say at every time, is being generated. It's just the surface of existence. It's the exterior. Everything here is being constantly put into existence by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The wise man, the genuinely wise man, realizes that fact. And he realizes that what he sees in front of him and what he feels and what he hears, it's all being put there constantly, directly, consciously by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us is to be wise, to recognize this fact and to respond not only to the physical circumstances in which we find ourselves, but to realize that every situation we are found in is a message to us from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he wants us to respond to him. Wow. What a high level of consciousness to be on, right? But if you're not on this level of consciousness, on some level, you are not a chacham. You are not a wise man. And you can really understand this from the pasuk. Reishis Chochma, the beginning of wisdom, the first fact, the basic fundamental fact that everything else is built on. Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem, constant awareness of the presence of God. So where does that leave us? Are we all a bunch of idiots? I mean, how often are we on that level of consciousness of a HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And to what degree are we remiss when we're not at that level of consciousness? When we're actually involved in something and we might not be thinking God at that time? Okay, so my formula to answer that question on a practical level, I'll take a statement in the Nefesh HaChaim by Rav Chaim Volozhiner. There he paraphrases the Zohar, and he coins this phrase, which has caught on and has become the lyrics of a popular nigun. Yisrael v'oraisa v'kudasha barichu chadhu. Yisrael and the Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are one. I'm not saying what I'm about to say is pshat in this statement, but what this statement tells me is there are three focal points of our consciousness that all of us can direct our thoughts to, and by which we fulfill our obligation of Shivisi Hashem L'Negdi Tamid, consciousness of the presence of a HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yisrael v'oraisa v'kudasha barichu chadhu. Israel, the Torah, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are one. Let's start from the last one on the list. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are times when every single one of us must focus directly on the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is right here. Pshuto kamashmo, simple shot. At what times during every day is this obligation the strongest? Shema, Tefillah, when we daven. We're talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're addressing him. That doesn't make sense unless you are aware that he's right there and can be addressed in the second person. Baruch atah, blessed are you. I'm going to digress for just one moment. We have a special mitzvah to do that on Yom Kippur. In addition to davening, saying bracha, saying Kriyas Shema, on Yom Kippur we have the mitzvah of vidui, confessing our averos. According to the Rambam, you fulfill the mitzvahs aseh of teshuvah only if you confess verbally. That is, enter a dialogue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say to him, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Right? And the lashon of the Rambam is v'chol hamarbeh lehisfados umarich be'inyan zeh. Whoever increases vidui and dwells at length on this matter, harei zeh mishubach, is praiseworthy. So although there is a standard form of vidui that we say several times throughout Yom Kippur, and if we have the right kavanas, we certainly fulfill our obligation of vidui with the standard vidui, it is desirable to take some time during Yom Kippur and just talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, tell him how you recognize the things you've done wrong, and tell him what commitments you're willing to make, in your own words, in the future, in the year to come. Okay, so we have these times during the day. There's an obligation to say 100 brachas a day. And every Jew, on a normal weekday, there's no problem. If you daven, you eat food, you go to the bathroom, you go to the 100 brachas, you'll get without any trouble. Shabbos, it's a little bit harder. You have to make a point of it. But at least 100 times a day, we all say, Baruch Atah Hashem. And if we have kavanah, 100 times a day, we are directly drawing a Kadosh Baruch Hu into the forefront of our consciousness. But Rav Tzadok HaKohen notes an interesting feature of virtually every bracha, 99% of all brachas. Let me take a typical bracha. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Shehakol Nihiyeh Bidvaro. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, that everything comes into being through His Word. Notice what happened there in that bracha. We started out addressing HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the second person. Blessed are you, Hashem. But we didn't end off the bracha, Sha'akol nihiyeh bidvarcha. Everything comes into being through your word. It's Sha'akol nihiyeh bidvaro. Everything comes into being through His word. HaKadosh Baruch Hu started out as you in the second person and ends off as He in the third person. What happened there? So Tzadok says that the wording of this bracha and almost every other bracha reflects the truth of the human condition, at least as it existed at the time that brachas were coined down to the present day. And that is, we can have these moments when we have clarity and we can address HaKadosh Baruch Hu as you. We feel His presence. It makes sense to talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the second person, right? But our condition is such that those states are ephemeral. They pass. They're not permanent. Even for the Chafetz Chaim, they're not permanent, right? Sometimes he's you, but that's not permanent. He's going to be he. You'll know he exists, but you don't really feel his presence there, right? So when we can't talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as you, how do we fulfill God consciousness? How do we fulfill Shivisi Hashem L'Negdi Tamid? So let me go to the second point in the formula. Yisrael v'oraisa v'kudasha b'richu chadhu. Israel, the Torah, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are one. In some sense, the Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are one. Let me elaborate on this. One of the critiques that the Nefesh HaChaim had about at least certain streams in Hasidus was that when they were learning Torah, they were trying to experience dveikus, religious ecstasy, through their learning. Right? They were trying to get into a state where, working on the Tosfos, they're going to feel God. They're going to feel all kinds of mystical, experiences, mystical sensations. Rav Chaim Volozhiner says that's a completely incorrect approach to the study of Torah. Torah is a demanding and difficult discipline. If you want to understand Torah, it demands your full concentration. And then you're fortunate if you understand, right? But if while you're learning the Tosfos, you're trying to grab angels, he says you're not going to be here or there. You're not going to understand the Tosfos, and you're not going to have, you want to have the Vekus, all right. There are times, there are ways, but learning Torah, learning halacha especially, don't try for it. Just get shot. But then you've got the problem. Well, if I'm not thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu while I'm learning Torah, seems like, how can that be? Am I allowed to ignore God? How can you do that? So, Reb Chaim Volozhiner's answer is based on a fallacy in the question. The question is, well, you have to be two places at once. If you're learning Torah and you're concentrating completely on the Torah, you're not concentrating on God. And if you're concentrating on God, you're not going to understand the Rashi, right? You are viewing God and Torah as two different things. And that's because, considering that you're just a human being, your mind cannot apprehend what God is. You know what He wants from us. You know how sometimes He interacts with us. And, all right, you form a certain working conception that works for you of what He is. But that's not the reality. It's not even close. So when you ask the question, when I'm learning a Torah, I'm not focusing on God, what you're really asking is that when you're learning Torah, you're not focusing on your primitive and distorted conception of God. He says that's okay. Forget about your primitive and distorted conception of God. Be aware that when you are learning Torah, you are concentrating on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's it. That's it. The Torah is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can't talk about parts. Focusing on Torah is a direct way of focusing on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he adds a qualification. That's if you realize that that's true. If you're not a believer and you just open up a sefer and start learning it and you don't acknowledge that that is a religious experience and that is a means of connecting with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it won't work. And he recommends that before you start learning, you say this tefillah that's printed on the inside of your Gemara, the Yehi Ratzon, just as a statement. Well, of course, there's a prayer there, and you want it all to come true, but that already puts you in the mode that I understand that what I'm about to be doing for the rest of the day, for the next several hours, is direct communion with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we've made things a little bit easier now, right? You are certainly fulfilling Shivisi Hashem L'Negdi Tamid when you're davening. And by the way, not just the formal tefillos. Sometime during the day, you want to say your own tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. All right, that's legitimate. That's wonderful. It's not just legitimate, right? You are fulfilling Shivisi Hashem L'Negdi Tamid when you are learning. Good. I've just expanded the amount of time that I'm fulfilling direct consciousness of the presence of God. But there's more to the day than that. What about the rest of the day? Everything is ignoring HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Let's go back to the formula. Yisrael v'oraisa v'kudusha b'richu chadhu. Israel, the Torah, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are one. All right, we've spoken about the Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu being one. Now let's talk about Yisrael. One of the earliest tzaddikim mentioned in Chumash is Hanoch. Hanoch lived in the generations between Adam Harishon and Noach, and when everybody was living for 700 years, 800 years, Hanoch died at the tender age of 300 and something, and the Torah says HaKadosh Baruch Hu took him. Chazal tell us he was too pure for this world. Now there's a medrash that tells us what Hanoch's vocation was. Hanoch was a shoemaker. And the Medrash says that with every stitch, when he was making a pair of shoes, with every stitch, he was miached yichudim la'akadosh baruch hu. He was concentrating on the unity of God. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter has a very novel interpretation of that Medrash. He says, you know what that means practically? Practically speaking, how was he focusing on God's unity? With every stitch, he had in mind, I have an obligation to my customer. This man paid me good money, and he needs a good pair of shoes. I am going to make the best pair of shoes possible. That's his pshat. Normally, you think miyached yichudim, going into mystical states, experiencing the perfect unity of God. No, no, no. Doing the best job you can for your customer. What does that mean? You have to understand that what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter did to answer, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was working on the same question that Rav Chaim Volozhiner was working on, and his answer has the same structure. When, a great amount of our time is spent in interacting with other human beings. And the Torah demands we treat other people with love and respect. Now, if you want to treat people properly, there are many, many situations in which they demand your full attention. I don't have to list specific cases. They're infinite, right? So here we have the same problem that Rav Chaim Volozhiner raised when you learn Gemara. Well, if I'm thinking, if my friend is pouring out his heart to me right now, and he knows that if I'm going to be thinking about, the kasha I had in Shir this morning, he can tell I'm not listening. No, I can't do that. He demands my full attention, right? Well, if he demands my full attention, how can I think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I got to think about him, right? I can't be two places at once. That is what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, that's the problem he's answering. He says, when you are devoting yourself fully to the needs of your fellow Jew, that is focusing on the unity of God. That's what Hanoch was doing. You've got to make a pair of shoes for somebody. You've got to do the best you can. And you are fulfilling the awareness of the unity of God. And why is that? Why is that? Because why do you owe people anything? Why do you owe them chesed? Why do you owe them respect? Why can't you just say, I'm not going to hurt anybody, but I'm in this for myself, right? Why do I have to sometimes die for another person? Because they have value. You don't assign them their value. They're made b'tselem Elokim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put them there. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said they have value. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said you owe them certain things, right? So by carrying out those obligations and treating your fellow man with the love and respect, not only that they deserve, but that the Torah demands that you give them, you are acknowledging the godliness within them. And you are fulfilling Shivisi Hashem L'negdi Tamid. Okay, so now we've covered all three bases. We have three legitimate focal points for our consciousness by which we fulfill consciousness of the presence of God. Yisrael, V'oraisa, V'kudesha Barichu. But let's be honest with ourselves. You have a good day in the yeshiva. You davened and you had kavanah from the beginning to the end. You had a good seder and you were a nice guy, right? But don't I have the right to have a little time for myself, right? I can't. What if I just need to relax a little bit. I need to loosen up. Is that? I mean, that's not. I'm not learning Gemara right now, and I'm not doing any chesed, and I'm not davening. I just need to relax. I need some recreation. Is that illegitimate? Am I then ignoring HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Right? So, one of the great Balei Musar dealt directly with this question. Rav Yosef Yehuda Leib Bloch, the Telzer Rosh Hashiva. Let me just tell you something about him. He was a great Talmid Chacham, but even a greater educator. He was a true Mechanech. He became Rosh Hashiva of Telz in 1910. And he did things that nobody else did. He started a teacher's seminary for women. He started a yeshiva high school with secular studies. I'll tell you, another thing he did, he would take a 19-year-old yeshiva bacher, guys your age, and he would tell the guy, and of course he couldn't get away with this with everybody, but with a select few, he'd say, you know, there's a little shtetl 20 kilometers over here, 12 Jewish families, they can't afford a Rav. You go there, you be the Rav for the next 3 months. That 19-year-old guy would come out a man, right? He knew who he did. He did this. A man with, as they say, very broad shoulders. His greatest innovation was, at least I think his greatest innovation, was what he called the Shiur Da'as. Now, in his day, and even to some extent in our day, in a Litvische yeshiva, there were two main personalities on the staff. The Rosh Hashiva and the Mashgiach. The Rosh Hashiva taught the highest shir in Gemara, and once a week he would address the entire yeshiva and give a shir on the sugya that was being learned that week, the shir klali, while the Mashgiach gave the Moser Shmuz. Right? He was more interested in the midos, the Yiras Shamayim, not so much the intellectual development of the students. Now, in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, the Rosh Hashiva was a more impressive figure than the Mashgiach. He was almost by definition a greater Talmid Chacham, and sometimes, and often, he was just a bigger man. And in certain yeshivas, guys got the impression that, well, if you're a bright guy, you become a lamdan. If you're a loser, you become, a musarnik. Which is, and then you get this attitude among the brighter students. They begin to look at musar, working on your midos, with disdain, which is a very unhealthy thing. Rav Bloch said, that's not going to happen in my yeshiva. Remember, every week he addressed the yeshiva, the shir klali, the shir on the sugya that the yeshiva was learning that week. 3 weeks out of 4, the Rosh Hashiva would give shir on the sugya of the week. 1 week out of 4, he would give a Musar Shmuz, which he called a shir das, to make it clear to the students that Musar isn't just for people who can't handle lumdus. The same person you get your lumdus from, you get your Musar from. So, we have the good fortune. He didn't write down his Shirei Das, but he had very good students who recorded many of his Shirei Das. And to my mind, personally, the best sefer that the Musar movement produced. At least I can say with certainty, the one that I got the most from. And there's one Shir Das there that deals with this question. Is there anything in our lives that's optional? Can we do things just because we want to? Or must we always ask ourselves, what is my obligation at this moment? Rav Bloch answers that sometimes your obligation is to do what you want to. He said, listen, we're not David HaMelech, and we're not even the Chafetz Chaim, we must be honest, right? We are people who are involved in this struggle that everybody's in, where your spirit pulls you one way, and your material side pulls you the other way, and you can't pretend that your material side doesn't exist. It's there, and it will assert itself, and you must satisfy it. Okay? So if you're a person who can't just learn, daven, and do chesed 24/7, if you're a person who needs just to have a little fun once in a while, right? Don't deny that. Don't suppress it, because then you'll just be frustrated. And during morning Seder, you'll be thinking about the things that you wished you could do and you didn't do. He says, be honest with yourself. You need some recreation. You need to eat some foods that aren't the most healthy thing for you, right? Well, then do it. Be honest with yourself. Ask yourself, how much do I need? And enjoy it. Take it and enjoy it. But remember, you take more, you're a chazer. Then you're making yourself a more coarse and vulgar person, and you're blocking your ability to recognize the presence of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Right? Let's say you're the kind of person you need to take a vacation every year. All right? And if you're honest with yourself, a week in Israel, okay, reasonable, okay? But if you know that in terms of relaxation, recharging your batteries, taking a break, a week in Israel will do it, then you can go back to your routine. But instead of a week in Israel, it's 2 weeks in the Bahamas. Whoa, that's wrong. Then you're a chaser, right? Okay, listen, another example. Listen, you go to any nutritionist, any doctor, I don't think there's ever a situation where they'll tell you the thing that's best for you right now in terms of your energy and general physical well-being is to eat some ice cream. I don't think that'll ever happen, right? But you like ice cream. And if you never eat ice cream or chocolate cake or all these foods that aren't good for us, but that we like, right? You'll be grouchy. You'll feel deprived, right? Okay. Once in a while, you'll figure out for yourself how much is necessary. Indulge. But don't take that second slice of chocolate cake. All right? You know that one slice of chocolate cake is enough. Second slice, you're being a chazer already. Okay? Now, he says this is okay. But keep one thing in mind. Whenever you do this, whenever you just indulge, because you need to, for the sake of your wholesomeness, for the sake of not being a frustrated person, you think, all right, this is where I'm holding right now, right? Right now, I need a week vacation in Eretz Yisrael, every couple of years, or else, I'll just I'll be grumpy. It's not good for me. Got to break loose, okay? But you have in mind, but I'm working to be a person who needs less of this mundane type of satisfaction. And eventually, I want more and more of my real satisfaction to be provided by things with real meaning. Right now, I need a piece of chocolate cake once in a while, right? Maybe someday I won't. Halavai, someday I should only eat the things that are most healthy for me. Keep in mind, you want to minimize your dependence on the material things and become a more spiritual person. Another thing he says, don't drive yourself crazy. Example, you're the kind of person, you come home from davening, you got to take a look at the newspaper. All right. It's on the internet now, and nobody reads newspapers anymore, right? But you gotta just check up what happened. Okay, first thing you do, you gotta see what happened in Israel. Move on. You have to see if your team won. Okay. Now you're going to ask yourself, well, do I need to read the editorial or not? Maybe I can do without that this morning. On the other hand, maybe I'll be curious you're going to drive yourself crazy, right? Don't start trying to measure this out, to the millimeter with calipers. You can't do it. Be natural. All right, you're going to spend more time trying to decide whether you should be reading the editorial or not than it'll take you to read the editorial. Go ahead, read it, get it over with already. Be natural. Don't get hung up on little things. Okay. Another thing that I want to add, the Talzer Rosh Shiva talks about recreation, enjoyment of the material world. But there's another issue that he doesn't deal with directly, but is a very related issue, and the principles that he set forth are equally applicable, and that is making a living. Making a living, right? Not everybody can make a living learning or teaching Torah, right? You make a living, that's also something that's necessary for your spiritual and emotional well-being. So don't view it as a b'diavad. However, keep in mind what the Rav Chaim Volozhner says in his Sefer on Pirkei Avos Ruach Chaim. It says, Tov Torah im derech eretz. Right? Torah, well, there's so many explanations for that Maimer Chazal. The simple explanation is Torah is good with labor, normal work, making a living. Rav Chaim Volozhner adds a little twist to that. He says there is an ideal that your work shouldn't fill up your entire mental space. If you're doing something that doesn't demand your full concentration, have some Torah in mind even while you're working. And I need not add, he didn't say specifically, don't work more than you need to make a living. If you're making a living and then you're dafka working overtime when you don't really need that money, that's bittul Torah. That's already overindulgent, overdoing it. Let me speak about one more point. Just mentioned that according to the Talzer Rosh Shiva, take what you need from Olam Hazeh. Don't feel guilty about it. Take it because you do need it. You need it for your vodas Hashem. But keep as an ideal, as a practical goal even, that you're going to try to minimize your dependence on material things. Well, how do we work on attaining that goal? In other words, how does a person become more spiritual? We've got shelves and shelves of Sforim that deal with the answer to that question. I'm just going to go through a few of the methods that have been proposed and have been popular in relatively modern times. The modern Musar movement, founded by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, focused on perfection of midos, perfection of character traits. There are several classical sforim that talk about what human character traits are desirable, what human character traits are undesirable. The Musar movement preached the idea that you should be conscious of these traits and measure yourself up. Always take stock of yourself, do introspection, ask yourself what you're doing well at, what you're not doing well at, and work directly. Always be checking yourself. There's even a sefer written by one of the Baalei Musar, I forget his name, but the title of the sefer is Cheshbon HaNefesh, which basically means taking stock of yourself. And in there, he's got a checklist or a chart in which he takes 30 character traits, He'll take things like humility, laziness, honesty, and he's got 30 of them, and he says on the first of the month, you work on this trait. On the second of the month, you work on that trait, etc., etc. And every month, you go through the 30 touchstones and see where you're holding, see how you can improve. Now, the Musar movement had mixed results. I'm not going to say what I just said right now is the whole thing, okay? But to oversimplify, again, it involved identifying what human character traits are, doing introspection, seeing how you match up, and based on that, improving yourself. Again, the Musar movement had mixed results. It produced certain individuals who were virtually angels walking this earth. But it also produced a lot of casualties. It's very demanding. It's very demanding. You're always asking yourself, what's wrong with me? How can I improve? To constantly be focusing on yourself and especially on your flaws, it's a hard thing. It's exhausting, and if you're not strong enough to handle it, it can have bad results. The least of the bad results: migraine headaches, obsessive compulsive disorder, right? The worst of the bad results: this is just too hard for me. This is Yiddishkeit. I can't handle it. Goodbye, right? And all of these things happened in the Musar movement. The Chazon Ish was an opponent of the Musar movement because he saw that it was a shoe that did not, it was one size that didn't fit everybody's foot. And he wrote a very small sefer, but a very revolutionary sefer, and he had a completely different approach to improving midos. The main idea that he preached in his sefer, he maintained that meticulous adherence to halacha is all you need to perfect character. All I can say is that from what I've seen and from what I've been taught, I'm sure that worked for him, and I'm sure that worked for many of his contemporaries, but it doesn't work nowadays. You can have people, I'm not going to say it doesn't work for anybody, but it doesn't work for everybody. You can have people who are meticulously adhering to halacha and have no human feeling whatsoever. It can happen. It can happen. I'm not saying it always happens. It can happen. But between the lines there in his sefer on Midos Emunah B'Tachon, he briefly talks about a different method. And that is the following. To the Chazon Ish, I mentioned to you that there's a Sefer Cheshbon Nefesh, a list of 30 midos. We have Sforim here, Mesilas Yesharim. It's not going to have 30 midos, but it'll have 20-some. Orchos Tzadikim talk about different midos, right? The Chazon Ish says, these are all true. You have to understand which human character traits are desirable and which should be avoided. And these Sforim are giving us valuable information. However, he says, what it all boils down to is two midos, or more precisely, one midah and its opposite. Everything boils down to, are you conscious of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, or are you, chas v'sholom, ignoring him? If you're conscious of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, things will improve. It'll permeate everything you do. And if you're not, well, you don't have much hope of getting things right. But how do you increase consciousness of a Kodesh Baruch Hu? And here the Chazon Ish says this briefly. And I found the same idea in a different source, a very surprising source, for me anyhow. I'm going to tell you a short vort from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and I'm going to expound on it a little bit. Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Ben Azai Omer, have a rotz mitzvah kala, run to perform even an easy mitzvah, uvoreach min ho'avera, and run away from the sin. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter asks, what do you mean run away from the sin? It just should be run away, ho'avoreach min avera, run away from sin. What do you mean the sin? What sin are you talking about? So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says the following. Everybody has one weakest point. Ben Azai is saying, don't focus on everything. Don't go through the checklist of all 30 and work the first of the month on humility, and the second of the month on honesty, and the third of the month on laziness. No, no, no. Identify the sin, your avera, your weak point, and just focus on that. That's as far as Rabbi Yisrael Salanter takes it, but let me elaborate on that. What's going to happen? What should you do? Yeah, have that checklist in front of you. Consider, at one time during the year, or not just one time, every now and then, take stock. Look through all the possibilities and identify what's your weakest point, and work only on that. And if you work on that, you'll see, if you work on that sincerely, right, you will see improvement in every area of your life. Let me give you an example and an explanation. Let's say, for example, a person, his weak point is Lashon Hara. Now, already, if a person says, my weak point is Lashon Hara, that's a mistake. Lashon Hara is a symptom. It's not a cause. The more you like people, the less you are prone to say Lashon Hara. The more you dislike people, the more you don't want to hurt the people you love, right? If you love everybody, you're not going to say bad things about them. Well, not too often anyhow. But if you dislike people, you want to put them down, right? It goes hand in hand. But let's say this person identified his weak point as misanthropy or Lashon Hara. And let's say this person 7 times a day, I'm just picking a random number, he has, on the average, 7 times a day, a Yetzer Hara to say something negative about somebody. Now, let's say this person says, okay, it's not like Lashon Hara is the only thing I do wrong. But I have to admit, out of all the things I do wrong, Lashon Hara is the worst. Okay? And my project now is to improve. Okay? So how do you improve? Well, obviously, if you learn through Hilchos Lashon Hara, you've made a big step, but that's not enough, because that's treating the symptom and not the cause, right? The cause is you don't like people, right? So the way you work on that is, whether you like them or not, you be nice to them. Do favors for people. Do things for people even though you don't feel like it. And before you know it, you'll start liking them more. That's what you do. And the fellow says, okay, this is not going to be easy for me, but I'm standing before God. I believe in God. I want to improve. I want to do tshuva, right? So I'm going to work on this. Well, so take the next day. First of all, the guy, after davening, he starts learning Chafetz Chaim and Shmiras HaLashon and Guard Your Tongue and all these other sforim. Even though he'd rather be learning something else, but I got to work on Lashon Hara. Then he says, well, I have to start being, he sees somebody's having difficulty schlepping something. Normally he'd ignore it. No, I'm going to help him out, right? And then he's sitting in the dining room and he knows some juicy story about somebody and he really wants to say it, and he says, no, I can't, it's Lashon Hara, right? Well, already, it's not even morning Seder yet. And 3 times already, You had to struggle. You didn't want to learn Chofetz Chaim then. You'd rather learn something else. And you didn't want to help that guy out. You rather would have done something else. And you really wanted to say over that interesting story, but you kept your mouth shut. And every time you made those difficult decisions, you're thinking, this is what I want to do, but I'm not doing it because the Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want me to do it. And you might even think I'm going to get in big trouble if I do it. That's okay. Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to put me in big trouble if I do it. All right? So what you're doing then, by working on your weak point, is you're drawing HaKadosh Baruch Hu into your consciousness every time you have a test. Right? And if this happens several times a day, you are pulling HaKadosh Baruch Hu into your mind at times when previously you were ignoring him. You are increasing your God consciousness. And before you know it, by working just on Lashon Hara, without realizing it, without even trying, you're going to be waking up on time for davening. You're not going to be laying around in your bed those extra 5 minutes. And when you're saying the words of the davening, you're going to be thinking about it, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has become more of a reality in your life. Okay? So this is the method recommended both by the Chazon Ish and by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter for self-improvement. Just want to conclude. You guys here, I mean, I have to say it, these, in a certain very important respect, are the best years of your lives, right? You have been put into an environment which is so conducive, it's designed to be conducive to self-improvement. It's designed to be conducive to your recognition of the presence of God, of His values, of His Torah, understanding His Torah. When are you going to have an opportunity like this? I mean, life's going to have its demands, and like the Talzer Rosh Hashiva said, you have to devote yourself adequately to life's demands, and they're not always going to directly increase your Yiras Shamayim, like the demands that you're facing right now in this year, in these 2 years, in these several years that you're going to be in yeshiva. It's really your obligation to take advantage of everything the yeshiva here has to offer you. Whatever your kona, whatever you acquire here in these years and the years after when you'll be in other yeshivas, they are going to set the degree of Yiras Shamayim you're going to have for the rest of your life. They are going to determine what kind of model you are going to be for the next generation. And it's a tremendous abdication of responsibility to take this opportunity and not to use it. So, gentlemen, I urge you, first of all, do what I told you right now, in the name of the Chazon Ish, in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Between now and Yom Kippur, take stock. Take stock. See where you have to improve the most. Identify that point. And based on what I told you, let's say you made a mistake. Instead of identifying your worst point, you identified your third worst point. It doesn't really matter. A point that is going to be a challenge for you. Take the challenge. You're here now in laboratory conditions, right, where you can devote yourself to self-improvement. Okay? Be smart about it. Don't think you're going to make big changes overnight. It's a message that everybody who talks about Tshuva at this time of year says. I'm sure you've heard it from other Rebbes here, from other Rebbes everywhere in other places. Make your goals realistic, okay? But make them in the area that's your biggest challenge. Another thing, we mentioned in the name of the Telzer Rosh Hashiva that although we recognize our dependence on certain material things for our self-satisfaction, and we have to be honest with ourselves, we need them, right? But our ideal is cut them down. Cut them down. I don't think there's anybody here who, if you ask yourself, what am I doing just for recreation, can't find some little thing where you can tell yourself, okay, I'm in yeshiva now, I'm not what I was last year. This thing I can really do without. Whether it means, I don't know, less time on the internet, or a little bit less of this, a little bit less of that, I leave it to you. In some way, make a concrete step towards what we can call spiritual growth. Make the statement, I'm not as dependent on the physical world as I was before I came here. I can do without this already, right? I've taken a step towards being a more spiritual person. At least that. We're going to be together for this next year, and I daven for myself, and I give a bracha to all of you, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'hoyer eineinu b'sora secha, right? We ask, we're here in davening, we have the bracha before Kriya Shema in the morning. Avinu harov harachamon hamrachem rachem aleinu. Our Father, merciful Father who has mercy, have mercy on us. V'sein b'libeinu lahavinu lahaskil. Put it in our hearts to understand and to comprehend, to hear, to learn, to teach, to keep, to do, and to fulfill all the words of your Talmud Torah with love. And then we say, V'ha'er einenu b'sora secha. Open up our eyes, enlighten our eyes in your Torah. What are we asking for there? Didn't we already ask, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, tein b'libeinu lahavinu lahaskil, l'mod l'lamed? Didn't we say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, put it in our hearts to understand and to know, to learn? And after that, v'ha'er einenu b'sora secha. Open up our eyes through your Torah. What I think we're asking for there is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we want to, we have to daven. Without your help, we're not going to grow in Torah. Make us understand. Like we said, Torah is a difficult discipline, and you need siyata d'shmaya to understand it well. Without tefillah, you're not going to succeed in Torah. But then we recognize it's a step there's a next step. When we're learning Torah, like the Nefesh HaChaim said, we're connecting with you. But we're asking after we're learning Torah. When we have to close the Sefer, V'hoyer einenu b'sora secha. Through your Torah, put light into our eyes. Let us see reality more clearly as a result of your Torah. Let it be that even after we close the Sefer, where before we just saw all kinds of physical circumstances, now let us see you through those physical circumstances, through the effects of our Torah. May we all have a year of growth in Yiras Shamayim, in understanding Torah, in Avodas Hashem B'Simcha. Gemar Chasim Tova.